From Washington, D.C., in Business Today, 3 things to know. First, rate this summit. The Africa Summit wraps. Some go home with deals, others go home empty-handed. But one clear winner, the U.S. president. Then, pick your despot. Controversy over which African dictator got an invite to the summit and which did not. A former U.S. ambassador gives us insight in how these decisions are made. And billions hacked. A Russian gang pulls off a massive digital heist of billions of passwords. Are you at risk? Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. More than 40 African leaders from 51 countries are heading home, and some with business deals worth billions. A 3-day unprecedented summit in Washington wrapped up with a news conference from President Obama, and in many ways, this was his summit. Even though it was proposed a decade ago, the U.S. was seen as playing catch-up. Mr. Obama spoke this evening.
In closing, I just want to say that this has been an extraordinary event, an extraordinary summit. Given the success that we've had this week, we agreed that summits like this can be a critical part of our work together going forward, a forcing mechanism for decisions and action. So we agreed that the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit will be a recurring event to hold ourselves accountable for our commitments and to sustain our momentum. And I'll strongly encourage my successor to carry on this work because Africa must know that they will always have a strong and reliable partner in the United States of America.
The amount of deals made is somewhere between $14 and $33 billion. It depends on how you count the money. But no matter the number, there are big companies pledging some big projects. Here's a short rundown. General Electric plans to spend $2 billion on railroads in Nigeria and airplane engines in Kenya. Coca-Cola will invest an additional $5 billion, bringing its investment to $17 billion by 2020. Marriott Hotels will invest more than $200 million in 36 new properties, and Procter & Gamble will invest $300 million in new manufacturing plants near Lagos. And Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man, is pledging $5 billion with U.S. private equity firms Blackstone and the Carlyle Group to work on infrastructure projects throughout Africa. Jake Bright, contributor to the Financial Times, This is Africa, and Whitehead Fellow of the Foreign Policy Association, now joins us from New York. Jake, good evening to you. You were here in Washington yesterday. You heard the president speak a little bit, and just from a foreign policy position, this a win for him?
I think it's a win on 2 levels, in that the U.S. has been criticized for being slow to act with Africa in terms of engaging Africa as a commercial partner, the way the rest of the world has done and a lot of our economic rivals and partners have done. And I think both the tone, both the initiatives, and then the big numbers that the Business Forum in particular facilitated yesterday, I think has definitely done that and put the U.S. on a different course with Africa.
This summit was proposed more than a decade ago by former President Bush and one of his ambassadors, John Day Fraser, who we spoke with yesterday. Why did this simply take so long to get together?
You know, that's the big question. People have said the president's had a lot of other foreign priorities. There's been a lot going on. I don't know. The important thing is that it did happen, and there are, significant deliverables. And I think that, the tone and the focus of U.S. policy toward Africa will definitely be changed as a result of the last couple days.
$14 billion, it sounds like a big number. Where is most of this money going to be spent?
Still piecing that together. I was able to talk to some of the CEOs yesterday, and the most significant deal, in my view, was the $5 billion announced by Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man, between his firm and Blackstone Group with Stephen Schwartzman. That's absolutely massive, Andrew. It's private equity funds. Each side is going to put up $2.5 billion. And they're going to invest it in infrastructure projects in Africa, which, over the last several years, the dominant, statement has been Africa needs jobs and Africa needs infrastructure. Well, with this, you have both. And just to put it in perspective, this is twice as much private equity funding than the total amount that's gone into Africa over the last several years. So that's just significant. And then the other thing that was announced, although the Carlyle hasn't released numbers, is Dangote is also partnering with the Carlyle Group. So you have the two largest private equity firms in the world, and arguably two of the most influential U.S. CEOs in the world now firmly committed to Africa. And behind that is multi-billions of dollars that's going to go into building infrastructure on the continent.
And I wonder, because these are sort of the Olympic gods of business out there doing this deal, and how much of that then is going to trickle down and encourage much smaller companies to get involved. And in a moment, we'll speak with Congressman Gregory Meeks from New York. That is something that he is focusing on, is the opportunities for much smaller companies.
Well, that was another significant thing that came out. I mean, these big headlines are obviously very significant, but the Secretary of Commerce, Penny Pritzker, was also hosting. And there were a number of initiatives announced to increase U.S. trade between the two continents. And one of those was expanding the commercial service, which a lot of people don't know, that the U.S. does have a diplomatic service committed to helping American small and medium-sized businesses do business in the world. And there was a significant announcement to expand the commercial service offices in Africa. One of the other deliverables yesterday was an announcement of 10 trade missions to Africa. And these are the missions where usually the Secretary of Commerce or somebody else within the U.S. government will bring plane loads of U.S. executives and small and medium-sized business owners over to Africa to facilitate meetings. And it's really, that's where this is significant for the government, is that they're being a catalyst.
And getting people on the ground there.
Yeah, they get them on the ground. You connect these leaders together, and then the American and African private sector will sort the rest out on their own. But being that catalyst definitely is significant.
Okay, Jake Bright, contributor to the Financial Times. This is Africa. See you back in New York soon.
Great to see you.
Later in the day, New York Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks held what amounts to a high-level networking event. He invited CEOs from African companies to meet American businessmen, where the focus, as Jake just mentioned, was on how small U.S. businesses can make investments in Africa.
The key, as we end this summit, is what deals are struck during the summit. So we want individual companies. That's why we had the CEOs, over 50 CEOs from the African continent, over 150 from the United States, to meet and network with one another so that they know. Because the best way to do business in Africa is to make sure that you have a joint venture partner in Africa, and then to connect it with institutions like the Exim Bank, like OPIC, who could also provide some of the capital that's necessary, especially for the small and medium-sized enterprises. We want the big businesses there, but there's great opportunities for the small and medium enterprises also.
A really interesting point, because we heard about the $14 billion. We hear the names General Electric and Coca-Cola and IBM, but so much about the investment in Africa is a real opportunity for small businesses in the U.S.
And that's what we stressed. And that's why we had a number of CEOs who have small and medium-sized businesses. And that's what makes it a win-win for the countries in Africa, because by connecting with them, you create jobs there, but you also create jobs here in America. The small and medium-sized businesses is the #1 employers here in the United States. And so we're looking to make sure that they hook up, because oftentimes they have not been able to find one another. And so I think that one of the results that we're looking at achieving as a result of this conference is letting them find one another and utilizing government and some of the agencies that the United States has to help them find one another. And that then also demystifies how you do business in Africa.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because it's so far away for many, it's hard to connect how you do it, and you make the local connections here.
Well, that's right. And what happens is, and I think that, in talking to OPIC and in talking to XM, they are now putting together a personnel that can make sure that we are catering to and reaching out to our small and medium-sized businesses here. Because guess what? Not only can they connect with the African CEOs, but our large businesses. They need certain supplies. They need to have joint venture partnerships also. So this then can start from the top all the way down, and it can benefit everybody in a broad spectrum. It also will lead, I think, to giving us the momentum to make sure that we reauthorize AGOA, which is due to expire in 2015, September 2015. And we need to make sure that we reauthorize it well before it is due to expire, so that the businesses will be able to know with confidence that the subsidies that are there and the trade agreement that is there will remain, and they won't pull out.
Do you think you're swaying any votes from other Congress people on that issue through this conference?
Well, I am really optimistic, because one of the last things that we did before we broke for summer recess, one of the last bills that was passed in the House was a resolution. And that resolution talked about how, in fact, important the relationship between the United States and Africa is, but it also talked about how important AGOA is. And that was a bipartisan resolution of which was worked on with the Democratic leadership and the House leadership, especially when I think of the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, and the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Dave Camp, along with each respective ranking member, and from the speaker to the to Nancy Pelosi, the ranking member on the Democratic side. So that gives me the immense belief that we will come together on reauthorizing AGOA, and hopefully learning from the lessons of the last 14 years on how we can improve it so that we can have even better results from the agreement.
And finally, on the issue of President Obama's legacy and the criticism that he faced in the first term of not reaching out enough to Africa, has this summit been a huge success for him politically, and will this go to his legacy?
Well, I think it absolutely will go to his legacy. All you have to do is to have been around for the last couple of days, and you will see the kind of close relationship that he has with many of the Africans on the African continent, and how they're looking to him and looking to his leadership. That there's no question in my mind. When you saw the big announcements that he made yesterday on making sure that there's the investments in Africa, when you think about the Electrifying Africa Act, which is huge. That's all President Obama, what he did. And if you could electrify Africa, think about what it does for the continent. You're talking about reducing poverty, you're talking about better education, you're talking about better institutions, because a lot of those things is very difficult to do if you don't have the electricity. All of the modern technology that we have today, if you have no electricity, it does not work. So it really, it's the first thing that you do so you can connect the continent to the rest of the world.
We'll have more from the Africa Summit a little bit later in the program. But first, turning to Wall Street, traders pushed the S&P 500 to a 2-month low during the day. But for the most part, there wasn't a whole lot of movement on Wall Street. Here are the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closing at 16,442.76. That's up 13.87. The S&P 500 squeaked out a 3-cent gain to 19.24. And the NASDAQ ended up the day 2 and a fraction to 43.55. So light day on Wall Street, light volume all around. Some of the stocks we're watching today as corporate season continues, earnings season continues. American Online reported second quarter earnings per share of 34 cents. That was in line with expectations. Revenue of nearly $607 million beat estimates. AOL closing the day up $2.92 to $41.92. Time Warner has reported second quarter earnings also coming in today. Earnings per share of 98 cents beat expectations, but revenue did come in a little bit lighter than expected, and that hammered the stock. Time Warner closing down nearly 13% to $74.24. An arrival of Time Warner, 21st Century Fox announcing it has withdrawn its bid to purchase Time Warner. Fox also reporting second quarter earnings per share. They did well, 82 cents a share on $8.7 billion in revenue, ahead of estimates. And taking a look at commodities, gold closing at $13.0810 and oil at $97.01 per barrel. Coming up, a brazen assault on your digital life, how Russian hackers stole 1 billion passwords, and what you should do next. You're watching Arise Exchange from Washington, D.C.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, is always. It's always an issue, and the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange. 500 million email addresses and 420,000 websites have been attacked by a Russian gang that walked away with a staggering 1.6 billion passwords. As we have reported before, much of the digital thievery is the result of hackers based in Russia. Scott Schober is the president of Berkeley Veritronic Systems and a cyber security expert, and he joins us live now from New York. Scott, these crazy Russians keep doing this. What are they getting away with it, and how are they doing it? You know, what is the sort of the technology behind them that allows them to scour for these passwords?
Yeah, they never give up, that's for sure. In this particular case, what they did was they really focused in on the black market. And what they were doing over a period of time, 7 months to a year, were accumulating all of this stolen information. And they're using these credentials, basically, to perform scams, basically phishing scams where they send you an email, for example, and they try to lure you in and get your password. And they did steal a number of passwords as well. All of this is really because they want to promote spam, and that's where they make a lot of their money.
All right, so and so they're going to promote spam, but are they stealing bank account numbers, for example, and they're stealing passwords into bank accounts?
Not at this point, not yet. It's not been discovered in that particular case. It could lead to that, certainly. What they're doing is they're accumulating information. Of course, these masses of information they will then sell to others that in turn may try to do those things. So there's certainly a possibility that could happen, and a lot of danger there down the road. We don't know what will happen.
And why is this coming out of Russia? Is the Russian government simply not cracking down on this?
Well, no, one would wonder, are they actually promoting it to cause other tensions and things like that? We really don't know, but there's a lot of smart guys behind this, and they form like gangs that do violence or other things. These guys are cyber intelligent groups that will amass and get together to perform all these things.
Okay, so we're on the receiving end of some of these thefts. I'm not sure how they, but can I just ask, how do we know that they stole 1.2 billion usernames and passwords? I mean, who's counting?
Well, the story was broken by a group called Hold Security, and they monitor these things and very closely a lot of the cyber crimes at the gang level activity, and they have some unique ways to gather the statistics and such. So they've confirmed this after about 7 months of research, and they just recently broke the story on this. The one thing that's a little bit compromising or concerning to myself and others is they also provide, after the story broke, they mentioned that they have subscription services where they provide for $120 the monitoring in case you are on the list there of one of those that got attacked.
So it's kind of like the old school protection money.
Yes. So there's something concerning there. Be careful before you sign up for the subscription service to find out.
Absolutely. So what should we do to protect ourselves?
Yeah, a good point. There's where we got to be careful. If we're using a specific password for our email, and we use that same password in other cases, maybe for trading, for bank accounts, so on and so forth, very, very dangerous. Always have a different password for each site that we log on to. Because once the login credentials are compromised, they have ways of getting the password and using it across the board, and then they'll take your money and cause other problems.
But we can't remember all of our passwords. They just keep multiplying. Is there help out there?
There is help. There's apps and things. I personally don't trust them. I have a little black book that I hide my passwords in, and I encourage people to do that and make them complex.
A little old school.
Yeah, old school. Old school is the safest way, that's for sure.
Scott Schober, president of Berkeley Veritronics. As always, great advice.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Take care.
CEO of one of the country's largest banks joins us next here on Arise Exchange.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
Having a bank account is still a novel idea in most of Africa, but mobile technology is actually putting banks in the hands of millions throughout the continent. And that is helping the next generation of entrepreneurs get the money needed for their bold ideas. We spoke with Joshua Oigara. He's the CEO of KCB Bank in Kenya.
In our markets, let me talk about Kenya and the region where we operate, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. You need more partners to come in together to be able to reach the requirements of a small business. A small business could be selling clothes and shoes, milk and water. It's not a larger business. And so if we bring in partnership, our concern has been how do we get mobile solutions, for instance, M-Pesa, to connect with the bank and deliver a one-stop solution, both technology, financial, and mobile solution.
And so does it begin with the individual having a mobile account and then reaching that individual who may one day then become an entrepreneur?
It's been very dramatic, very historic in the last 7 years when you've seen M-Pesa in our markets. So you're right, it starts with a relationship. Today, you can open up an account on your mobile device, whether it's a phone you have or whether it's a tablet you have. That gives you fast relationships. And then from that process, you do what you call a pre-scoring, and on that, then you can run a full banking relationship.
Do you think this is taking off faster in Kenya and Africa than in the U.S.? Because Americans have had, relationships with banks and maybe feel more nervous about doing mobile banking.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say a lot has changed. You see, Africa generally has gone through a missed mark of technology revolution. So because we didn't have fixed lines over time, the mobile device has become the basic document they have to work with. So people are more confident in terms of security, in terms of encryption of information. And I think that has given people more space to interact and run their businesses.
And it's good for your bottom line, isn't it, if you're not supporting brick and mortar buildings and tellers?
What could transform really the lives of our people and the countries we operate and the entire continent is the aspect of providing financial services to millions, to billions of people today who had no access before. So the smaller businesses are a key part, a catalyst of transformation.
So this is not just a mobile platform for banking, but offering a full range of financial services, savings, investments.
Deposits, lending from them, insurance for them. And so we partnered with them ourselves and different organizations, particularly our strategic partnership with Safaricom has been one of the unleashing capabilities.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting is how did that partnership come about where you wanted to take your business, banking business, centuries-old businesses, and a brand new technology?
Normally, it's largely because our belief is about transforming Kenya or the nation as KCB, and Safaricom's belief is about transforming lives. So ultimately, we want to make it better for our future customers today and tomorrow. So if we find all ourselves with one common vision and mission, we're able to deploy that in the markets where we are.
As a banker in Kenya, are you happy with the pace of transparency in the government and in the financial markets?
We've been very excited. We've been in the process of creating the change in regulation, both at the central bank level, communication levels, and the national government level. So as the largest bank, we're very involved in creating the strategic shift in the regulations.
And you think the regulations are strong enough from both a consumer perspective and also the financial stability of the region?
There's been a lot of work being done on the financial side. So in terms of Basel II and Basel III guidelines have been done. I think we are now picking up new on the consumer protection to bring them much more to international level. And I think we are in the forefront of enabling that to happen. So it's kind of a partnership, or what I call a handshake between us, the government, and our consumers to unleash the potential of our markets.
Right now, what is the penetration of mobile banking compared to people who have physical bank accounts?
So mobile today, so let's say bank accounts around 23%, and 50% of that is mobile banking.
Okay. Wow, so there's a long way to go, but also a substantial portion has already mobile technology.
Exactly.
Next, who's in and who's out? The controversy about invitations to some African leaders with a checkered history. You're watching Arise Exchange.
Arise serves underserved communities by bringing them news, information, sports, and entertainment from places that are becoming part of the world economy, that are becoming a part of the world voice, and decisions that are affecting things in the world that people care about. They care about the economy. They care about safety and security. And if you come to Arise and you watch our broadcast, these are the things we're going to bring to you every day, 24 hours a day.
One of the great things about Arise News, it is truly a multicultural global channel that is paying attention to communities of all different kinds, not just here in the United States, not just in Africa, but all around the world, as we're giving a voice to the people that don't traditionally have the kind of a voice that a mass media organization can have. You're getting here at Arise News that you're not going to find at the other networks is a unique perspective, and I think that's part of what Arise is here to do.
The president of the Republic of Congo, who has been accused of stealing billions of dollars and fixing elections, he was invited to the summit. Come on, have dinner at the White House. But the dictator of Zimbabwe, not so much. So who gets to play in Washington and who doesn't? That is an ongoing diplomatic dance. We asked former U.S. Ambassador for Special Affairs to the United Nations and the current CEO of Meridian International Center, that's a nonprofit that works with the UN, Stuart Holliday, about the controversy as to who attends.
There are countries that are here that we don't agree with on every policy. There are issues, for example, right now with Kenya, Equatorial Guinea, Nigeria. Good luck Jonathan is here. We've got the Boko Haram issue. But in terms of the work that needs to happen here, it's important that those countries be represented. And I think that there are individual conflicts within a variety of these countries on the political transparency in certain cases, and America is a big believer in democracy and human rights.
Nigeria, though, is a democratic country. Maybe some issues, but democratic. But Ecuador not, right? So and a strong man in place.
Right.
So how are the decisions made about who gets invited and who doesn't get invited? Because Zimbabwe is not represented.
Right. Well, if you look at Zimbabwe or Eritrea, for example, you have countries that there are existing sanctions and that are clearly not part of the constructive process. And so in the case of those countries, or Central African Republic, for example, who has a leader that's been placed in through a coup. These decisions are made by the National Security Council in consultation with the State Department. There's obviously the African Union, which is a reference point. So for example, CAR is suspended from the African Union, and this is a regional conference, so we've got to consult with the African Union, and then the process goes into one of erring on the side of inclusion. Mm-hmm. So these weren't one-on-one meetings, as you know. It was a group setting, and so in a sense that insulates the president from the idea of a one-on-one photo op with a particular leader who we may not like.
Oh, and the State Department, when they make these decisions, I guess it's not a binary 1 or 0 decision, right? There's a totality that they look at and how bad somebody is?
Yeah, absolutely. And plus we have security priorities. The United States is invested in stability of Africa. And, there's some problems, particularly in the Sahel. So yes, there's a balance. And I think when it gets to the point of really somebody that's clearly violated either international law or where there are sanctions placed against them, that makes it a lot clearer. But again, it's a subjective process, but they've erred on the side of inclusion in this case.
Now, I was going to ask you that. Is it better to be more inclusive than not inclusive, and then maybe invite everybody?
Well, in this case, I think it makes a statement. Most of these countries, if not all of them, are moving in the right direction. Again, we have a case, where you have certain people that have been in power probably too long, and there's a generational thirst for new leadership in some of these countries. But no, I think in the case of Mugabe, for example, there's clearly a pariah situation there. Now, should we have invited somebody from Zimbabwe? Yes, I think so. I think it's important to have everybody represented. But at the head of state level, maybe not.
And there's an economic point that's being made here, right? If you go down a certain path, you are going to be left out of billions and billions of dollars on the table.
That's right. This is it's a tool to use, and if those parties are not included in this, they're going to miss out on that economic benefit going forward.
In your opinion, did they make the right decisions?
I think they did, yes.
So an impressive 3 days here in Washington, D.C. Leaders from 51 African countries here. They don't all agree on all of the policies. So getting in the same room to talk, that was pretty impressive. We'll see which of these deals stick. We'll see if they do this conference again. Arise Exchange is back in New York tomorrow. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Good night.